Hello, everyone. This is Marcus Kane, and today I want to tell you a story about a man who didn't lose everything in one moment, but slowly, quietly, almost invisibly, until 1 year passed, and there was nothing left to hold on to, and the most dangerous part was not the loss itself, but how normal it felt while it was happening. Listen carefully, because this kind of story doesn't look like failure in the beginning. It looks like an ordinary life.
My name is Daniel. And if you saw me 1 year before everything collapsed, you probably wouldn't notice anything wrong, because every morning I woke up at the same time, around 7:10, not because I wanted to, but because my alarm kept ringing until I couldn't ignore it anymore, and I would sit on the edge of my bed for a few seconds, staring at the floor, trying to wake up, already feeling tired before the day even started. I remember one morning very clearly. The room was cold. Not freezing, but that uncomfortable kind of cold that makes you stay under the blanket longer than you should. My phone was buzzing next to me. I reached for it, half asleep, opened a message from the bank, saw a number I didn't like, and immediately locked the screen like that would somehow erase it. Later, I whispered to myself. I said that word a lot. Later. I got up, walked to the bathroom, looked at myself in the mirror, and for a second I didn't recognize the person looking back, not because I looked different, but because I felt disconnected, like I was watching someone else live my life. I splashed water on my face, got dressed, grabbed my jacket, and left. Outside, the air was cold and quiet. People were already moving, going to work, walking fast, looking focused, like everyone had somewhere important to be, and I just followed the same path I followed every day, stopping at the same small coffee place. The guy behind the counter looked at me and said, "The usual?" I nodded. Yeah. He didn't ask anything else. I didn't say anything else. That's how most of my conversations went. Short. Empty. Automatic. I paid, took the coffee, and checked my phone again. Another message. I didn't open it. At work, everything felt the same. Same desk. Same screen. Same noise in the background. I sat down, opened my computer, and stared at the tasks I had been postponing for days, maybe weeks, and instead of starting, I clicked on something else, then something else, until an hour passed and I had done nothing important. Around noon, my boss walked by and stopped near my desk. "Daniel," he said, calm but serious, "did you finish that report?" I froze for a second. "Yeah, almost," I said, even though I hadn't even started. He looked at me for a moment. Not angry. Just disappointed. "Send it to me before the end of the day." "Sure." He walked away. And I just sat there, staring at the screen. Feeling that pressure again. That quiet pressure in my chest. Later that day, I went out to buy something small, just a snack, nothing important, and while standing in line, I opened my bank app, looked at the number, and for a second I hesitated, really hesitated, like something inside me was telling me to stop, to think, to not ignore it this time. But then I sighed, paid anyway, and told myself, "It's just a few dollars. It doesn't matter." That sentence followed me everywhere. It doesn't matter. Weeks passed like that. Small decisions. Small lies. Small delays. And nothing felt urgent enough to change. Until it was. One evening, I was sitting on a bus, heading home, and it was dark outside, the kind of darkness where you can see your own reflection in the window, and I remember looking at my reflection, tired eyes, empty expression, and behind it, the city moving, people walking, lights everywhere, life happening. And I felt like I wasn't part of it. Like I was just passing through. A guy next to me was laughing, watching something on his phone, and for a second I wondered when was the last time I laughed like that. I couldn't remember. That night, when I got home, I dropped my keys on the table, took off my jacket, and saw an envelope on the floor near the door. I almost stepped over it. Like always. Ignore it. Deal with it later. But something stopped me. I bent down, picked it up, turned it in my hands, and just stood there for a few seconds. Then I opened it. Slowly. Carefully. Like I already knew it wasn't good. And I was right. I sat down. Right there. On the chair. Letter in my hands. And I read it again. Then again. Trying to understand how things got this far. Trying to remember when it started. But the truth was, it didn't start in one moment. It started in hundreds of small ones. I looked around my apartment. The same walls. The same table. The same silence. But everything felt different. Heavier. Real. I took my phone, opened my bank app again, refreshed it. $0. I refreshed again. Still $0. I let out a small laugh. Not because it was funny. But because I didn't know how else to react. Okay, I said quietly to myself. Okay, what now? No answer. Just silence. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, opened the fridge, and just stared inside for a few seconds, like I was expecting something to appear, like maybe I forgot something, but there was nothing there. I closed it. Slowly. Leaning my head against the door for a moment. Eyes closed. Breathing slowly. That was the moment. Not loud. Not dramatic. But clear. I lost it all. I didn't move for a while after that. I just stood there in the kitchen with my hand still on the fridge door, staring at nothing, trying to process what I already understood but didn't want to fully accept, because there is a difference between knowing something and actually facing it, and in that moment I crossed that line without even realizing it. I went back to the table, sat down slowly, took the letter again, and started reading every line more carefully, even though I had already read it twice, because part of me was still hoping that I misunderstood something, that maybe it wasn't as bad as it looked, but the more I read, the clearer it became that this was real, and that I had run out of time to ignore it. Final notice. Those two words stayed in my head. Not loud, not dramatic, just repeating quietly, like a reminder that I could no longer delay anything. I leaned back in the chair, rubbed my face with both hands, and let out a long breath, and for the first time in a long time I didn't try to distract myself, didn't reach for my phone, didn't turn on the TV, I just sat there in silence, because I knew that anything I tried to escape into would only delay what I had to face. The next morning felt different, not because anything improved, but because I couldn't pretend anymore that everything was under control, and even simple things like getting out of bed felt heavier, like I was carrying something invisible with me. At work, I tried to act normal. I sat at my desk, opened my computer, and stared at the screen, but I couldn't focus on anything, because my mind kept going back to the same thoughts, the same numbers, the same question: how did it get this bad? Around midday, my boss called me again. "Daniel, can you come for a minute?" I stood up, walked into his office, and sat down across from him, trying to look calm, even though I could feel my heart beating faster. He looked at me for a few seconds before speaking, like he was choosing his words carefully. "I've noticed you've been missing deadlines lately," he said, not aggressively, but directly. "This is not like you." I nodded, trying to think of something to say that would sound reasonable. "Yeah, I've just been dealing with some stuff," I replied, avoiding specifics, hoping he wouldn't ask more. He leaned back slightly, still watching me. "Are you okay?" That question caught me off guard, not because it was complicated, but because I didn't have an honest answer that I was ready to say out loud. "Yeah. I'll fix it," I said after a short pause, even though I didn't know how. He didn't argue, didn't push, just nodded once and said, "All right, but I need you to get back on track, we can't keep missing things like this." "I understand." I stood up, left the office, and as soon as I sat back at my desk, I felt that pressure again, stronger this time, because now it wasn't just money, it was everything starting to crack at the same time. That evening, on my way home, I didn't go straight back to my apartment, I just kept walking, without any clear direction, hands in my pockets, looking down at the ground, thinking about everything at once, and for the first time I realized that I had been avoiding not just my problems, but my own life. At some point, I stopped near a small convenience store, the same kind of place I had gone to hundreds of times before, and I stood there for a few seconds before going in, like I was deciding something bigger than just buying food. Inside, everything looked the same as always, bright lights, shelves full of things I didn't need, quiet music playing in the background, and I walked through the aisles slowly, picking things up, putting them back, checking prices, actually paying attention this time. At the register, the cashier looked at me and said, "Long day?" I gave a small nod. "Yeah." He scanned the items, told me the total, and I hesitated for a second before paying, not because I couldn't, but because for the first time I was aware of every dollar leaving my account, and that feeling was new, uncomfortable, but real. When I got home, I didn't turn on the lights right away, I just walked inside, closed the door behind me, and stood there in the dark for a moment, listening to the silence, and it felt different than before, heavier, but also clearer, like I was finally seeing things as they were. I sat down at the table again, took a pen, a piece of paper, and started writing, not because I wanted to, but because I didn't see any other option anymore, and as I wrote down numbers, debts, payments, everything I had ignored for so long, it started to form a picture that I couldn't deny. "This is bad," I said quietly. Not panicking. Not dramatic. Just honest. And that honesty was uncomfortable, but it was also the first time I felt like I was actually doing something instead of just reacting. Days passed, and nothing got easier immediately, in fact, it felt harder, because now I was aware of everything, every expense, every mistake, every consequence, and I couldn't go back to ignoring it, even if I wanted to. At work, I forced myself to focus, even when my mind wanted to drift away, and slowly I started finishing small tasks, then bigger ones, not perfectly, not fast, but consistently, and even though no one noticed at first, I knew it mattered. One afternoon, my coworker sat next to me during a break and said, "You've been quiet lately, everything all right?" I thought about giving the usual answer, the automatic, "Yeah, I'm fine," but something in me stopped that. "Not really," I said. He looked at me, a bit surprised. "What's going on?" I hesitated, then shrugged slightly. "Just messed up some things, trying to fix them." He nodded slowly. "Well, at least you're fixing them," he said, and then added, "Most people don't." That stayed with me. Because he was right. For a long time. I didn't. That night, I didn't sit in silence like before, I didn't avoid anything, I worked through my numbers again, adjusted things, crossed things out, made small decisions, and even though it didn't solve everything, it felt different. Not better. But real. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something small, but important. Not confidence. Not relief. Just direction. The strange thing about trying to fix your life is that at the beginning it doesn't feel like progress, it feels like pressure from every direction at once, because the moment you stop ignoring your problems you suddenly see all of them clearly, and instead of one big issue you realize you are dealing with dozens of small ones that are all connected, and that realization can be overwhelming if you are not ready for it. That's exactly how it felt for me. A few days after I started writing everything down and trying to take control, I received another call. This time I didn't ignore it, I stared at the phone for a few seconds, took a deep breath, and answered. "Hello? Daniel?" the voice on the other side asked, calm but direct. "Yes. This is regarding your account, we've tried to reach you multiple times." I closed my eyes for a moment, leaning back in the chair. "Yeah. I know." There was a short pause. "Can you explain your current situation?" That question hit harder than I expected, not because I didn't understand it, but because for the first time I had to say it out loud, not just think about it. "I'm behind on payments," I said slowly, choosing each word carefully, "but I'm trying to fix it." Another pause. Then. "We need something more than trying." I swallowed. "I understand." We talked for a few more minutes, discussing numbers, deadlines, options, none of which sounded easy or comfortable, and when the call ended, I just sat there with the phone in my hand, staring at nothing, feeling that pressure again, but this time it was sharper, more focused. That same day at work, things got worse. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but in a way that made it clear that I was running out of time in more than one area of my life. "Daniel, I need that report now," my boss said, standing near my desk, his tone no longer calm, but still controlled. "I'm finishing it," I replied quickly, even though I was only halfway done. He looked at the screen, then back at me. "You said that yesterday." I didn't answer. Because there was nothing to say. He sighed quietly. "This can't keep happening." "I know. Do you?" That question stayed in the air for a second longer than it should have. "Yes," I said finally, even though I wasn't sure if I deserved to say it. He nodded once, then walked away. And in that moment I realized something I hadn't fully accepted before. I wasn't just fixing my life. I was trying to stop it from falling apart completely. That evening, instead of going straight home, I sat on a bench near a small street, watching people pass by, cars moving, lights turning on as the sky got darker, and I remember thinking how strange it was that the world kept moving like nothing was wrong, while inside my head everything felt unstable. A man walked past me talking on the phone, laughing, saying something about plans for the weekend, and I caught myself listening, not because I cared about what he was saying, but because it reminded me of something I didn't have anymore, that feeling of ease, of not constantly thinking about problems. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, hands together, staring at the ground, and for a moment I felt it again, that it would have been easy. Just one evening. Just one break. "No one will know," I said quietly to myself. And then another thought came. "I will know." That stopped me. Not motivation. Not discipline. Just that simple thought. I will know. I stood up, slowly, like I was making a decision that no one else could see, and instead of going home to escape, I went back with the intention to face everything again. That night was one of the hardest. I sat at the table for hours, going through numbers, making changes, cutting things, planning payments, adjusting everything I could, and at some point I felt completely exhausted, like my brain just wanted to shut down. This is too much, I said out loud. And for a second, I almost quit. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and imagined just stopping, just letting things happen, not fighting anymore, not thinking, not trying, just giving up control completely. It felt strangely peaceful. And that's what scared me the most. Because I realized how easy it would be to fall back. To return to the same habits. To lose everything again. I opened my eyes. Sat up. Took a deep breath. No, I said quietly. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a decision. And that was the moment. The real one. Not when I had $0. Not when I read the letter. But right there. When I had the option to give up. And didn't. The next few days were different, not easier, but more focused, like I finally understood that this wasn't about fixing everything at once, it was about not breaking again. At work, I started showing up earlier, not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because I needed to rebuild something, even if it was just my own discipline, and slowly I started completing tasks on time, then a little earlier, then helping with small things that I used to ignore. One morning, my boss walked past my desk, stopped, looked at my screen, then at me. "This is good," he said, pointing at my work. I nodded. "Thanks." He paused for a moment. "Keep going." That was it. 2 words. But they meant more than he probably realized. Because for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was not falling anymore. I wasn't rising fast. But I wasn't falling. And that was enough. What most people don't understand about rebuilding your life is that it doesn't feel like a big transformation when it's happening, it feels quiet, repetitive, sometimes even boring, because instead of dramatic changes you are just making small decisions every single day, and at first those decisions don't seem important, but over time they start to shape everything. That's exactly how it felt for me. Days turned into weeks, and weeks slowly turned into months, and even though nothing in my life looked impressive from the outside, inside something was changing, because I was no longer reacting to my problems, I was managing them, even if it was imperfect, even if it was slow. I remember one evening very clearly, because it was the first time I noticed a real difference, not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, almost invisible way that only I could feel. I came home after work, not exhausted like before, but just tired in a normal way, the kind of tired that comes from actually doing something, not from avoiding everything, and I put my keys on the table, sat down, and opened my phone. For a second I hesitated, because that action used to bring anxiety, but this time it felt different. I opened my bank app. Looked at the number. And for a moment I didn't react, because it wasn't a big number, it wasn't impressive, it wasn't life-changing. But it was not zero. I leaned back in the chair, exhaled slowly, and just stared at the screen, not smiling, not celebrating, just feeling something calm, something steady, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. Not complete. But real. "I'm not at zero anymore," I said quietly. And that sentence stayed with me. Because it wasn't about the money. It was about what it represented. Progress. Control. Movement. That same night, I stood up, walked to the kitchen, opened the fridge again, and this time it didn't feel empty, it wasn't full, but it was enough, and for some reason that moment felt more important than any big success I had imagined before. Because it was real. Because I earned it. Because I changed something to get there. At work, things also started to shift, slowly but clearly, not because I suddenly became the best employee, but because I stopped being unreliable. I showed up on time, I finished what I started, and even when I made mistakes, I didn't hide them, I fixed them. One afternoon, my boss called me into his office again, and as I walked in, I felt that old, but this time it didn't control me. He looked at me, then at his screen. "You've been doing better," he said. I nodded. "I'm trying to stay consistent." He leaned back slightly. "It shows." There was a short pause. "Just keep doing this." "I will." And as simple as that conversation was, it meant something different this time, because I knew it was real, not something I was pretending to be, but something I was actually becoming. Outside of work, my life was still simple. I didn't suddenly start going out, I didn't spend money on unnecessary things, I didn't try to reward myself in the old way, because I understood something now that I didn't understand before. Discipline is not punishment. It's protection. Protection from becoming the person I used to be. I remember one weekend, walking through the same streets where I used to spend money without thinking, passing the same stores, the same places, and for a moment I stopped in front of one of them, looking at something I would have bought before without hesitation. I stood there for a few seconds. Thinking. Not reacting. Just thinking. Then I took a step back. And walked away. No drama. No struggle. Just a decision. And that moment felt bigger than it looked. Because it meant I was in control. Not my habits. Not my impulses. Me. Months passed, and while my life didn't turn into something extraordinary, it became stable, and that stability felt more valuable than anything else, because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of checking my phone, I wasn't avoiding letters, I wasn't running from my own reality. I was living in it. Consciously. One evening, I found myself sitting at the same table again, the same place where everything once felt empty, and I looked around the room, and it felt different, not because the room changed, but because I did. I picked up my phone, opened my bank app again, looked at the numbers, and this time I didn't need to refresh it, I didn't need to hope for something to change, because I already knew. I put the phone down. Sat back. And allowed myself a small smile. Not because I made it. But because I didn't lose myself again. And in that moment, I understood something very clearly. You don't lose everything in one moment. You lose it slowly, through small decisions you ignore. And you rebuild it the same way. Slowly. Through small decisions you repeat. Every day. No shortcuts. No magic. Just consistency. If you saw me now, you wouldn't think I went through something dramatic, because from the outside my life looks simple, normal, nothing special. But the difference is not in what I have. It's in how I live. I am not rich. I am not perfect. But I am no longer lost. And that is enough. And maybe, if you are at the beginning of your own fall, or maybe already at the bottom, sitting somewhere in silence, looking at your life and not knowing what to do next. Maybe this is not the end. Maybe this is the moment you stop running. And start taking control. Step by step. Just like I did.
Life doesn't break in one moment. It changes quietly in the things we ignore every day. And most people don't notice it until it's too late. But here's the truth. The same way you lose everything is the same way you rebuild it. Slowly, step by step, decision by decision. So if you feel lost right now, maybe you're not at the end. Maybe you're just at the beginning. Take control of your life, one step at a time. I'll see you in the next story.